A Puritan experiment that sparked a revolution. A colonial backwater that invented America. This is Boston, where tea fueled rebellion, where abolitionists raged, and where brains became the new brawn. The history of Boston isn't just about the past, it's about how ideas built a city that still shapes our world. Puritan chains and the price of progress. The first European to carve his existence into the wilds of what would become Boston was William Blackstone, a lone scholar priest who beckoned Puritan exiles across the waters of Back Bay. They came in 1630, hungry for salvation, yet bound by rigid laws of faith that would shape the city in chains of piety and control. The Puritans wielded scripture like a weapon, founding the Massachusetts Bay Colony with the unyielding belief that their way was the only way. They built schools like Boston Latin in 1635, not to nurture free thought, but to mold obedience. And for a time, Boston flourished, its oceanfront teeming with trade, its harbors churning with the restless tides of commerce. But the city's grip on power faltered. As Philadelphia and New York swelled with ambition, Boston withered, its economy stagnating, its influence slipping away like sand through desperate fingers. By the mid-18th century, the once mighty Puritan stronghold found itself overshadowed, left to watch as other cities rose in wealth and prominence. Boston had been the first to dream of a city upon a hill, yet now, its light dimmed beneath the weight of its own past. The flame of rebellion and the siege of Boston. Boston, a city soaked in the blood of defiance, became the beating heart of the American Revolution, where every stone seemed to whisper of rebellion. The Stamp Act of 1765 set the city ablaze, as mobs tore through the homes of the royal enforcers, burning with a fury that could not be extinguished. British soldiers were dispatched in 1768 to quell the fires of dissent, but their presence only fed the flames, inflaming the city's resistance. The Boston Massacre of 1770, a brutal reminder of imperial might, saw British troops fire into a crowd, igniting the passion that would fuel a war for independence. But it was the Tea Act of 1773 that broke the dam, leading to the infamous Boston Tea Party. Anger boiled over as Bostonians, in a stunning act of defiance, hurled tea into the harbor, a symbol of their contempt for British tyranny. In retaliation, the British unleashed the Intolerable Acts, which only further hardened the resolve of the colonists. The response was inevitable. In April 1775, the first shots of the Revolution rang out in Lexington and Concord, and the British found themselves besieged by the very people they sought to crush. The siege of Boston had begun, a turning point in the fight for freedom, as the city became the cradle of rebellion, where every street echoed with the cries of revolution. The siege of Boston, a struggle for the soul of a nation. From the moment the first shots rang out in April 1775, the siege of Boston became a bitter struggle, where the hearts of patriots clashed with the iron resolve of the British Army. 4 months, the British were trapped, their movements restricted by the relentless siege led by the New England Patriots. The Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775, would haunt British commanders. Though they captured Charlestown, it was at a devastating cost. Hundreds of men lost, their blood staining the ground in a victory that felt more like defeat. The Patriots, with their fire and ferocity, had made their mark, showing the British that these rebels were not easily crushed. As the British clung to their hold on Boston, a new force emerged. On June 14, 1775, the Continental Army was born, with George Washington appointed as its commander-in-chief. With little more than hope and a shortage of supplies, Washington arrived in Boston, determined to break the stalemate. When the British held the city, Washington's troops were left in the cold, their progress stymied by the narrow Boston Neck. But in the darkness of winter, a young officer named Rufus Putnam conceived a plan that would change the course of the war. Under the cover of night, his men constructed fortifications on Dorchester Heights, their cannons pointing down on the British forces. By morning, the British were met with the impossible sight of a fortified position that seemed to rise from the very ground itself. With no way to fight back, the British General Howe, shocked and broken, abandoned Boston in defeat. On March 17, 1776, the British ships sailed away, leaving behind a city that had witnessed the birth of a new nation's indomitable spirit. The victory would go down in history as Evacuation Day, a testament to the resilience and cunning of a people determined to shape their own future. Boston's struggle, a city transformed by war and change. In the aftermath of the American Revolution, Boston's once proud harbor became a shadow of its former self, stifled by the Embargo Act of 1807 and the War of 1812, which shackled its vital international trade. But from the ashes of its maritime decline, Boston found new life in the emerging industrial age. The city's rivers, once highways of trade, now carried the raw materials fueling a burgeoning manufacturing sector. Factories rose like steel giants, and by the mid-19th century, industry had surpassed trade as the backbone of Boston's economy. Railroads wound their way through the city, further weaving a dense web of commerce that transformed it into an industrial powerhouse. Culturally, Boston blossomed as a beacon of intellectual and artistic influence. The Boston Brahmins, elite families rooted in the city's historic past, dominated the social and cultural landscape. They were the pillars of Harvard University, the Episcopalian Church, and the city's literary life. Yet beneath this veneer of sophistication, Boston was no stranger to the darkness of its history. Once a port for the Atlantic slave trade, it later became a crucible for abolitionist sentiment. The city, famed for its intellectualism, found itself in fierce opposition to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which spurred a bitter political struggle, epitomized by the failed attempt to capture runaway slave Anthony Burns. As tensions over slavery deepened, Boston stood as both a symbol of progress and a battleground for freedom. In 1822, as the city's population swelled, Boston shed its humble roots, formally transforming from a town to a city. Its population of just over 46,000 had grown, its area expanded, and its identity shifted. The city that had once struggled to survive was now a vital engine of industry, culture, and political conflict, a city whose rise would echo through the history of the United States. The rise of immigrant Boston, a city rebuilt from the ashes. In the 19th century, Boston became a city of transformation both physically and socially. The rapid growth of its population was fueled by waves of European immigrants, particularly the Irish, who fled the horrors of the Great Famine and arrived in droves, swelling the city's ranks to 35,000 by 1850. As the century wore on, more immigrants, Germans, French Canadians, Syrians, and Jews from Eastern Europe, added to the rich mosaic of Boston's urban life. The city's neighborhoods were reshaped, with Italians claiming the North End, Irish residents dominating South Boston and Charlestown, and Russian Jews carving out lives in the West End. These communities brought with them not only their cultures and languages but also their faiths, most notably Roman Catholicism, which remains Boston's largest religious community to this day. Boston's physical landscape, too, underwent a radical transformation. Between 1631 and 1890, the city tripled its size through extensive land reclamation. Marshes and mud flats were filled in to create vital new land for the city, changing the shape of the waterfront and creating neighborhoods like the South End, the West End, and Chinatown. The Great Boston Fire of 1872, which devastated much of downtown, was a turning point. Workers used the rubble to fill in parts of the waterfront, and the city expanded westward with the reclamation of nearly 600 acres of marshland. The city annexed numerous surrounding towns, incorporating South Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester, and Charlestown, among others, as it solidified its place as a growing metropolis. Yet with this growth came tension. The influx of immigrants, many of whom faced discrimination, fueled political and social divisions. The Irish, in particular, would go on to leave an indelible mark on Boston's political landscape, shaping its future through figures like the Kennedys and Tip O'Neill. Meanwhile, the city continued to grapple with its identity as an old colonial port town now emerging as a diverse, industrial powerhouse. The 19th century set the stage for a new era in Boston's history, one where immigrants, cultural clashes, and urban expansion would forever alter the city's character. A century of change, Boston's struggle with growth, decline, and renewal. The 20th century marked a period of dramatic architectural and cultural change for Boston, as the city navigated the growth of iconic landmarks and the economic challenges of the modern era. Early in the century, Boston saw the construction of architecturally significant buildings such as the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, Fenway Studios, and Fenway Park, home of the Boston Red Sox since 1912. Logan International Airport opened in 1923, ushering in the age of air travel. The Longfellow Bridge, with its distinctive salt and pepper shakers, became a beloved symbol of the city, immortalized in children's literature. However, the Great Depression cast a long shadow over Boston's economy, exposing the need for stronger financial regulations. The city played a pivotal role in shaping modern securities laws, with figures like Governor Frank G. Allen and Harvard professors drafting the landmark Securities Acts of the 1930s. Boston's own Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. would go on to lead the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, warning of the dangers of financial deception in a world increasingly dominated by corporate interests. Despite these advancements, Boston's economic prosperity began to wane as factories grew outdated and businesses fled to regions with cheaper labor. By the mid-20th century, the city was in decline. In response, Boston launched ambitious urban renewal projects aimed at revitalizing blighted neighborhoods, though these efforts often met with fierce resistance. The destruction of the historic West End, which displaced thousands of families, ignited public outrage and revealed the tensions between progress and preservation. As Boston entered the latter half of the century, the scars of these battles would remain, shaping the city's identity as it grappled with the complexities of modernity and its own history. Boston in the 21st century, transformation and tragedy. Boston, a city that once thrived as an intellectual and political hub, faced a new wave of challenges and transformations in the 21st century. While it continued to be a center of education, technology, and innovation, Boston also witnessed the erosion of some of its iconic institutions. The acquisition of Fleet Boston Financial by Bank of America in 2004, the merger of Jordan Marsh and Fillings into Macy's, and the sale of the Boston Globe to John W. Henry in 2013 all marked significant shifts in the city's economic and cultural landscape. Despite these losses, the city's Seaport District emerged as a beacon of renewal, with General Electric moving its corporate headquarters to Boston in 2016, signaling the city's continuing transformation into a modern, thriving metropolis. Yet, Boston's progress was not without tragedy. On April 15, 2013, the city was rocked by the Boston Marathon bombing, a devastating attack that killed 3 and injured over 260 people. In the aftermath, the city rallied around the slogan "Boston Strong," demonstrating resilience and solidarity in the face of terror. The 21st century also brought forth new aspirations, such as Boston's brief bid to host the 2024 Summer Olympics. Supported by city officials and business leaders, the bid was ultimately abandoned due to strong public opposition. However, Boston will still play a prominent role in the 2026 FIFA World Cup, hosting matches at Gillette Stadium. These moments of triumph and tragedy have defined Boston's modern era, with the city continuing to evolve as a symbol of endurance and reinvention. Boston proves that cities can outgrow their origins but never escape them, still revolutionary after 400 years. Now we want to hear your Boston story. Family roots? College memories? Or just love that accent? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for our next American City Deep Dive.